They were fools to think humans would ever negotiate. Commander Kevin Bailey's jaw clenched as he stared out the viewport of the UES Prometheus, humanity's most advanced starship. After months of careful diplomacy, he was finally approaching the resplendent capital city of the Evora, the heart of a vast alien empire that spanned dozens of star systems. Bailey knew the stakes were high. First contact with an advanced spacefaring civilization could change the course of human history. But he also knew that no matter what happened, Earth would never submit or surrender. As the ship touched down on the polished obsidian landing pad of the Imperial Palace, Bailey took a deep breath and straightened his uniform. He disembarked with his delegation of Earth's brightest minds, xenolinguists, trade experts, military strategists. They were greeted by a phalanx of stern Evora officials in elaborate robes, led by Minister Wazin, a shrewd traditionalist with a face like chiseled granite. Bailey could sense the Evora's disdain right away, the way they looked down their noses at the human delegation, the subtle sneers and exchanged glances. Clearly, they viewed humanity as primitive upstarts, unworthy of a seat at the galactic table. But Bailey didn't come here to be looked down upon. He came to forge a new future for his species. As the two sides sat down to negotiate in an opulent hall of glass and gold, the cultural chasm quickly became apparent. The Evora prized conformity, rigid castes, and ancient traditions. Humanity championed innovation, individual liberty, the relentless pursuit of progress. When Wesen scoffed at the very notion of democracy, denouncing it as chaos, Bailey felt his blood pressure rise. This wasn't going to be easy. Then it all fell apart. A human aide, unschooled in the Byzantine nuances of Evora etiquette, accidentally sat in a chair reserved for the Emperor himself. Wesen shot to his feet, eyes flashing with rage. "This insult will not stand," he shouted. "Earth must submit fully to Evora rule or burn." Bailey started to protest, but Imperial guards were already escorting the humans back to their ship. As the Prometheus blasted away from the planet, Bailey watched Wesen glaring after them from a palace balcony. The minister's face was a mask of cold determination. He thinks this is over, Bailey realized. That he can bully us into obedience or just wipe us out. He's in for one hell of a surprise. Bailey turned to his officers, a strange calm settling over him. If it's a war they want, then it's a war they'll get. And the Evora will soon learn the same lesson as everyone else. You don't fuck with Earth. Humanity doesn't negotiate. They fight, and they win, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. Bailey almost pitied the Evora. They had no idea what was coming for them. The mood aboard the Prometheus was grim as it hurtled back to Earth, the sting of the disastrous first contact still fresh. Commander Bailey paced the bridge, his mind racing. The Evora's ultimatum echoed in his head. Submit or burn. He knew there could be no submission, not now, not ever. But the alternative was almost too daunting to contemplate. As soon as the ship docked at the orbital command station, Bailey was ushered into a secure briefing room. The faces of the United Earth Council stared back at him from the view screens, etched with worry. President Graves leaned forward, his voice grave. "Commander, your report, please. Leave nothing out." Bailey recounted every detail of the mission, from the Evora's sneering condescension to Minister Weazen's final, fateful words. When he finished, a heavy silence descended. Finally, Admiral Simmons spoke. "There's only one path forward. We strike first, strike hard, and don't let up until they're on their knees." Over the next hour, a plan took shape. The Evora shipyard orbiting their homeworld, bustling with battleships undergoing repairs and refits. That was the linchpin. Take that out, and the Imperial fleet would be crippled before the war even started. President Graves steepled his fingers, his brow furrowed. "I don't relish the thought of a first strike. It goes against everything we stand for. But the Evora made their intentions clear. This is about survival now." He sighed, then straightened up. "Admiral, you have my authorization. Assemble your strike force." In the frenzied days that followed, Captain Akira Tanaka handpicked the ships and crews for the daring assault. State-of-the-art stealth cruisers, jam-packed with the latest weaponry, the pinnacle of human military might. Bailey watched the preparations with a mix of pride and trepidation. The fate of Earth, of the entire human race, hung on this one high-stakes endeavor. The strike force assembled in high orbit, sleek ships gleaming against the starry backdrop. On the bridge of his flagship, the UES Retribution, Captain Tanaka took a deep breath. All ships, this is Retribution Actual. The time has come to remind the galaxy what happens when you corner humanity. Commence jump on my mark. Space rippled and distorted as the human fleet leapt into hyperspace, racing towards their distant target. In the calm before the storm, Bailey found himself thinking of Minister Wazen, of the smug certainty on the old alien's face. You thought you knew us, he mused. You thought you could break us, but you're about to learn the hard way. Humans don't break. We fight. Dropping out of hyperspace on the fringes of the Evora home system, the human strike force engaged their stealth systems and crept towards the unsuspecting shipyard. As they approached, Bailey could make out the gleaming hulls of dozens of Imperial battleships, docked in orbital berths or undergoing repairs. It was a juicy target. On Tanaka's signal, the human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Lances of energy and waves of missiles slammed into the Evora ships and infrastructure, exploding in brilliant flashes. The Imperial crews, caught completely off guard, scrambled to battle stations in chaos and confusion. But it was too late. In a matter of minutes, the once proud Evora shipyard was reduced to a field of shattered metal and drifting debris. Dozens of battleships had been destroyed outright, and many more were crippled beyond repair. The human ships darted away, vanishing into stealth before the shell-shocked Evora could muster a response. In the aftermath of the stunning raid, the mood on the Retribution was one of elation and grim satisfaction. They had drawn first blood, and the Evora were reeling. But Captain Tanaka knew this was just the opening salvo. The Empire would surely strike back with all its might and fury. As news of the attack spread like a firestorm across the Evora worlds, Emperor Zoran raged in his throne room. "Unacceptable," he bellowed. "These primitives dare attack the heart of our empire? They will pay for this outrage 1,000 times over." But even as the Emperor ordered swift retaliation, the damage to his fleet and shipyard became clear. The losses were staggering, and it would take time to regroup and rebuild. In the Imperial court, a rising star named Kalar saw an opportunity. The young tactician had long argued for a different approach to warfare, one of stealth, sabotage, and surprise. "Your Majesty," Kalar said, bowing low before the throne, "the humans have shown they are treacherous and unconventional. We must respond in kind. Let me strike at their supply lines, their colonies. We will bleed them dry and sap their will to fight." Emperor Zoran studied the young Evora, intrigued. At last he nodded. "Very well, Kalar. You shall have your chance. Make the humans suffer for their insolence." As Kalar set to work, orchestrating daring raids and ruthless guerrilla strikes, the human forces scrambled to adapt. Colonies came under fire. Supply convoys were ambushed. The once triumphant offensive began to bog down into a grinding war of attrition. Captain Tanaka, racing from hotspot to hotspot with his battered fleet, knew the stakes were rising with each passing day. The initial victory had bought them precious time and leverage, but now the Evora were lashing back, goaded to new heights of fury and defiance. The war had only just begun, and already it threatened to consume both civilizations entirely. On the bridge of the Retribution, Tanaka stared into the starry void, his heart made. Humanity had picked this fight, for better or worse. Now they would have to see it through, no matter how long it took or how much it cost. There could be no turning back. The Evora had started this war, but one way or another, Tanaka swore, humanity would finish it. The war with the Evora raged across star systems, a brutal dance of attack and counterattack. Humanity's initial victories had given way to a grinding stalemate as both sides adapted to the other's tactics. Captain Tanaka's fleet darted from hotspot to hotspot, stemming the tide of Evora incursions, but the cost in lives and resources mounted with each engagement. Then came a breakthrough that would change everything. "Commander Bailey, we've got something," said Lieutenant Chen, her eyes alight with excitement as she burst onto the bridge of the UES Prometheus. Our deep space probes picked up energy signatures from the Theron system. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Bailey's brow furrowed. Theron? That's way out in the galactic boonies. What did we find? Chen handed him a datapad. Ancient ruins, sir. And if these readings are accurate, they're chock full of tech that makes our most advanced systems look like stone tools. Bailey's mind raced with the implications. If they could secure this technology, it could turn the tide of the war. But the Evora weren't fools. They'd be after it too. Assemble a team, Bailey ordered. We need our best people on this now. Within hours, an elite squad led by Captain Marcus Reeves was hurtling through hyperspace towards Theron. The planet loomed before them, a mottled sphere of greens and browns. As they entered the atmosphere, Reeves spotted the ruins, a sprawling complex of weathered stone and gleaming metal, half buried beneath centuries of vegetation. Touch us down there, Reeves instructed the pilot, pointing to a clearing near the largest structure. And keep the engines hot. I've got a feeling we're not alone out here. The team hit the ground running, weapons at the ready. They'd barely made it 50 meters when plasma bolts sizzled past their heads. Contact! Shouted Corporal Zhang, diving for cover. Evora forces, 9 o'clock. Reeves cursed under his breath. The bastards had beaten them here. He keyed his comm. All units, push forward. We can't let them reach those ruins first. The air filled with the staccato of gunfire and the whine of energy weapons as the two forces clashed. Reeves led his squad through the underbrush, using the terrain for cover as they advanced on the ruins. An Evora soldier popped up from behind a fallen pillar, and Reeves dropped him with 2 quick bursts from his rifle. As they neared the main structure, Reeves caught sight of a lithe figure darting between the shadows. He recognized her instantly from intelligence briefings. Zara, the Evora's top operative. Their eyes locked for a moment, a spark of recognition passing between them. Then the ground shook beneath their feet. A blinding light erupted from the heart of the ruins, accompanied by a deafening hum. Ancient machinery groaned to life, and the very air seemed to crackle with energy. Fall back, Reeves shouted, but it was too late. A shimmering force field sprang up around him and Zara, cutting them off from their respective forces. The ruins were coming alive around them, dormant systems reactivating after millennia of slumber. Reeves found himself face-to-face with Zara, both of them trapped in a corridor rapidly filling with pulsing light and strange symbols. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, weapons half raised. Well, Zara said finally, her voice surprisingly melodic despite the tension. It seems we have a problem, human. Reeves nodded grimly. Looks that way. Any bright ideas on how to get out of here? Zara's eyes darted around the chamber, taking in the unfamiliar technology. We work together, she said at last until we're free of this trap. After that, she left the implications hanging. Agreed, Reeves replied, lowering his weapon slightly. Let's see what we can learn about this place while we're at it. Could be the key to ending this war. As they cautiously explored the activated ruins, neither of them could have imagined the impact their discovery would have. Back on Earth, Dr. Elena Novak pored over the first fragments of data transmitted from Theron, her eyes widening in amazement. She breathed, this is incredible. The energy readings alone. My God, what have we stumbled into? The ancient technology held secrets beyond their wildest dreams and their darkest nightmares. As both humanity and the Evora raced to unlock its potential, the galaxy trembled on the brink of a conflict more devastating than anything that had come before. And in the depths of the Theron ruins, Reeves and Zara took their first steps down a path that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their enemy and themselves. The ancient technology of Theron promised to revolutionize the war, but its secrets remained frustratingly elusive. As the conflict dragged on, both sides found themselves confronting a far more immediate crisis, one of dwindling resources and mounting desperation. Admiral Simmons stood before the holographic display, his face grim as he surveyed the flickering red icons denoting resource-depleted systems. We're running on fumes, he said, addressing the assembled war council. If we don't secure a major supply source soon, this war is over. President Graves nodded, the weight of command evident in the lines etched across his face. "What do you propose?" Simmons manipulated the display, zooming in on a verdant world. "Jarek Prime, an Everin agricultural powerhouse. If we can take it, we'll have enough resources to sustain our efforts for years." A murmur rippled through the room. Graves frowned. "The civilian population will suffer," Simmons finished. "But it's them or us at this point." After a long moment, Graves gave a curt nod. "Do it." Captain Tanaka's strike force dropped out of hyperspace above Jarek Prime, a gleaming jewel of blue and green. As they plunged into the atmosphere, the peaceful facade shattered. The sky lit up with anti-aircraft fire, while swarms of fighters rose to meet them. "They were waiting for us," Tanaka growled, gripping his command chair as the ship shuddered under an impact. "All units, push through their defenses. We take this planet regardless of the cost." The first wave of dropships streaked towards the capital city, many erupting into fireballs before they could touch down. Those that made it disgorged squads of human marines into a maelstrom of plasma fire and explosions. Corporal Chen ducked behind a shattered wall, heart pounding as she surveyed the carnage. What should have been an easy sweep against ill-equipped colonists had turned into a nightmare of urban warfare. "They're dug in like ticks," she shouted into her comm. "And their weapons, this isn't standard Everin tech." A nearby building erupted in a gout of flame, showering Chen with debris. Through the smoke, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Kalar, the Everin tactician. His presence explained everything. "Captain," Chen called, "you're not going to believe who's running the show down here." Tanaka's voice crackled over the comm. "I see him. All units, new priority target. Take that bastard down." But Kalar was already melting away into the chaos of the city. As night fell, the human forces had secured only a few blocks, at a staggering cost in lives and equipment. In his makeshift command center, Tanaka stared at the tactical display, eyebrows furrowed. He knew what had to be done, even as his conscience recoiled at the thought. With a heavy heart, he gave the order. "Bring in the incendiaries. We'll burn them out." Soon the night sky glowed orange as entire city blocks were consumed in the cleansing fire. The screams of the dying, both soldier and civilian, would haunt Tanaka for years to come. Far across the galaxy, on a once lush Everin world now stripped bare for the war effort, a young soldier named Teva stood frozen in horror. Her squad had been ordered to disperse a crowd of protesters, hungry civilians begging for food. As her comrades raised their weapons, Teva's arms refused to move. "Fire!" her sergeant bellowed, but Teva couldn't. She wouldn't. In that moment of hesitation, chaos erupted. The crowd surged forward, weapons discharged, and suddenly Teva found herself labeled a traitor, running for her life as her former squad mates gave chase. A hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into a darkened alley. Teva whirled, coming face to face with a lithe Everin female, whose eyes glinted with a mix of purpose and something else. Doubt. "I'm Zara," the woman said, "and I think we need to talk." As Teva followed her rescuer into the shadows, neither of them could have imagined the role they would play in the conflict to come. For now, they were simply two souls adrift in a galaxy consumed by war, where the lines between right and wrong blurred more with each passing day. The galaxy burned. Admiral Simmons stared at the tactical display, his face a mask of relentless drive as reports of Evora attacks flooded in. Kalar's forces struck with ruthless precision, leveraging weapons derived from the alien ruins to devastating effect. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Orion outpost," a junior officer reported, his voice cracking. "That's the third colony this week." Simmons nodded, the weight of command bearing down on him. "Redirect the 7th Fleet to reinforce our position in the Centauri sector. We can't afford to lose any more ground." As the Admiral issued orders, Captain Tanaka received his most dangerous mission yet. He stood before a holographic projection of a heavily fortified Evora world, studying every detail. "Your objective is to extract a high-value defector, codenamed Nightfall," Simmons explained. "They claim to have intel that could turn this war around. Get in, get out, and don't get caught." Tanaka's infiltration team slipped through the planet's defenses under cover of darkness. They moved swiftly through shadowy streets, avoiding patrols with practiced ease. As they neared the rendezvous point, plasma fire erupted from nearby buildings. "Ambush!" Sergeant Rodriguez shouted, diving for cover. Tanaka's mind raced. How had the Evora known? He keyed his comm. "All units, fall back to extraction point Alpha. We'll regroup and—" His words died as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Teva, the disgraced Evora soldier, stood before them with hands raised. "I'm Nightfall," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I won't leave without Zara." Tanaka's eyes narrowed. "The operative who escaped with you? That wasn't part of the deal." "Then there is no deal," Teva replied firmly. Before Tanaka could respond, the night sky lit up with sickly green light. Alarms blared across the city as Emperor Zoran's vengeance was unleashed. A bioweapon, more horrific than anything they'd encountered, swept through the streets. "We need to move now," Rodriguez urged, gesturing to the rapidly spreading contagion. Tanaka's eyes sharp as he watched civilians collapse, their bodies racked with agony. Every instinct screamed at him to help, to save as many as he could. But the mission— "Lead us to Zara," he ordered Teva, his voice hoarse. "We're getting you both out of here." They raced through chaos-filled streets, dodging panicked crowds and collapsing infrastructure. Teva guided them to a nondescript apartment where Zara waited, her eyes widening at the sight of the human soldiers. "What have you done?" she hissed at Teva. "Saved us both," Teva replied. "Now come on!" As they fought their way to the extraction point, Tanaka's comm crackled to life. "Captain, this is command. We're tracking a massive exodus from the planet's surface. What's happening down there?" Tanaka watched as entire city blocks were consumed by the lethal bioweapon. "Hell," he replied simply. "It's hell." The shuttle rocketed away from the dying world, carrying its precious cargo of defectors. Tanaka stared out the viewport, the screams of those left behind etched into his memory. He had completed the mission, but at what cost? Meanwhile, on Jarak Prime, Commander Bailey shouted orders over the din of battle. Once verdant fields lay scorched and barren, the planet's ecosystem ravaged by relentless conflict. "Get those civilians to the evac zone," Bailey yelled, gesturing to a huddled group of shell-shocked colonists. "We've got 10 minutes before this entire sector becomes uninhabitable." As dropships filled with refugees lifted off, Bailey caught sight of a squad of Evora soldiers advancing through the toxic haze. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield. In that instant, Bailey saw not monsters, but weary soldiers, much like herself. The moment passed, weapons raised, and the cycle of violence continued. Across the stars, on forgotten outposts and desolate asteroids, the true toll of the war became clear. Supply ships, once taken for granted, now arrived like manna from heaven. Soldiers fought over scraps of food, their uniforms hanging loose on emaciated frames. On the bridge of the UES Defiant, Tanaka received his next set of orders. With Teva and Zara's intelligence, they had a chance to strike at the heart of the Evora war machine. But as he looked at the faces of his crew, haggard and haunted, he wondered how much more any of them could take. The war grinded on, consuming worlds and souls alike in its insatiable hunger. Admiral Simmons stood before the holographic display, his eyes tracing the web of red lines indicating Evora supply routes. "We need a game-changer," he muttered, more to himself than to the assembled staff. President Graves leaned forward, his voice low. "What are you proposing, Admiral?" Simmons manipulated the display, zooming in on a cluster of heavily fortified worlds. "Operation Ragnarok, a coordinated strike against the Evora's foundry worlds. Cripple their production, and we might just break this stalemate." A hushed silence fell over the room. Graves' brow furrowed. "The casualties will be severe," Simmons acknowledged. "But if we don't act now, we won't have an army left to fight with." After a long moment, Graves nodded. "Do it. But we need someone who can think outside the box for this one." "I have just the man," Simmons replied. "Captain Marcus Reeves." Aboard the stealth frigate Shadow Dancer, Reeves briefed his team on the audacious plan. "We're going to hijack their automated defenses," he explained, gesturing to a schematic of the Taraj foundry. "Turn their own guns against them. Specialist Zhang raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do we get past their outer defenses? Reeves grinned. That's where things get interesting. The shadow dancer slipped through the Foundry's sensor net like a ghost, piggybacking on the signal of an Evora supply ship. As they neared the massive orbital installation, Reeves felt his pulse quicken. Execute, he ordered. Hatches opened, disgorging swarms of modified maintenance drones. They latched onto the Foundry's hull, injecting lines of malicious code into its systems. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. Defensive turrets swiveled, opening fire on Evora ships. Hangar bays cycled open and closed, trapping fighters mid-launch. Reeves allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction before barking out his next order. Ground team, deploy! Pods streaked towards the Foundry surface as the space battle raged overhead. Reeves hit the ground running, plasma rifle at the ready. His team fought their way through confused Evora defenders, pushing deeper into the facility. An explosion rocked the corridor. Through the smoke, a familiar figure emerged. Kalar, the Evora tactician. His eyes locked with Reeves, a mixture of fury and grudging respect, evident in his alien features. You are persistent, human, Kalar growled, but you have no idea what you've stumbled into. Before Reeves could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A synthesized voice echoed through the corridors. Warning, Armageddon protocol initiated. Detonation in 15 minutes. Kalar's eyes widened in genuine fear. No, he breathed. They wouldn't. Reeves grabbed the Evora by his ornate collar. What is Armageddon? A doomsday weapon, Kalar replied, his voice hollow. Capable of shattering planets. If it detonates here... Reeves released him, mind racing. Where's the control center? Level 37, but you'll never... Reeves was already moving, shouting into his comm. All units converge on level 37. We've got a bomb to disarm. The next 14 minutes were a blur of desperate fighting. Reeves's team clawed their way through fanatical Evora defenders, acutely aware of each second ticking away. They burst into the control center with less than a minute to spare. Zhang dove for the main console, fingers flying across alien interfaces. I need more time. Reeves scanned the room, noting the sealed blast doors. We don't have it. Everyone out now. But sir, that's an order, Reeves roared, shoving his people towards the exit. As the blast doors slammed shut, he turned back to the console. One chance. With trembling fingers, he input the final sequence just as the countdown reached 0. A blinding light flooded the chamber. Reeves screwed his eyes shut, waiting for oblivion. It never came. Slowly he opened his eyes. The weapon had been disarmed, but at a terrible cost. The Foundry was a smoldering wreck, and the casualties on both sides were staggering. As Reeves stumbled from the ruins, he saw human and Evora soldiers alike staring at the destruction in stunned silence. The full weight of what they'd nearly unleashed settled over them like a shroud. But even as the echoes of battle faded, Reeves knew the war was a long way to go. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of Kalar rallying his surviving forces. And somewhere out there, Emperor Zoran was already planning his next move, driven by an unshakable belief in Everan supremacy. Reeves keyed his comm, his voice hoarse. Command, this is Reeves. Toraj Foundry is neutralized, requesting immediate extraction and a full report on casualties. As he waited for a response, Reeves gazed out at the stars. The Foundries had fallen, but at what cost? And what horrors still lay ahead in this war without end? The Foundries had fallen, but the war's appetite only grew more ravenous. As Reeves's team limped back to human space, Emperor Zoran seethed in his gilded chambers on Evora Prime. Holograms flickered around him, displaying the devastation wrought upon his industrial might. Unacceptable, he hissed, taloned fingers clenching into fists. Accelerate the apocalypse array. We will not be brought low by these vermin. Across the stars, Kalar's ships emerged from stealth, striking at vulnerable human outposts with surgical precision. On Hadrian's Reach, Commander Bailey's voice crackled over the comms as another wave of Everin fanatics descended upon the shipyards. All units, form up. We hold this line or humanity loses its foothold in the sector. The sky ignited as newly installed railgun batteries thundered to life. Hypersonic slugs tore through Everin assault craft, scattering debris across the war-torn landscape. Bailey watched grimly as the city around them crumbled under the barrage, knowing the cost of victory would be measured in shattered lives and ruined homes. As the smoke cleared, a new horror emerged. Kalar's forces unleashed canisters of sickly green gas, their contents twisting and warping all they touched. Captain Reeves, leading a counterattack, felt his throat constrict as the virulent toxins swept over his position. "Fall back," he croaked, stumbling through the haze. "It's a bioweapon." But it was too late. Reeves' world spun, his vision blurring as Everin troops in sealed armor surrounded him. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Kellar's triumphant sneer. Reeves awoke strapped to a cold metal table, harsh lights beating down upon him. An Everin scientist loomed over him, eyes glinting with cruel fascination. "Begin the procedure," a familiar voice ordered. Teva stepped into view, her expression unreadable. Days blurred into an eternity of pain as the Everins attempted to break Reeves's mind and body. They pried into his memories, injected him with mind-altering compounds, and subjected him to relentless psychological torment. Through it all, Reeves clung to fragments of his identity, fleeting images of Zara, the feel of a plasma rifle in his hands, the taste of real coffee shared with his crew. Even as his sanity frayed, a part of him remained aware enough to encode distress signals into his brainwave patterns. It was a high-stakes endeavor, but one born of stubborn hope. Aboard the UES Defiant, Admiral Simmons and Captain Tanaka pored over intelligence reports. A junior officer burst onto the bridge, eyes wide. "Sir, we've detected anomalous neurotransmissions from an Everin prison station. It's Captain Reeves." Simmons's heart made. "Prep a strike team. We're getting our man back." The rescue operation was brutal and costly. Antimatter charges ripped through the station's defenses, human soldiers fighting tooth and nail through irradiated corridors. When they finally reached Reeves, he was a shell of his former self, mumbling incoherently about Zara and Foundry worlds. As the Defiant limped away from the smoldering wreckage of the prison, Tanaka watched the stars streak by. The ship's medical bay was overflowing with the wounded and dying, the cost of this small victory etched in blood and pain. On a dozen worlds, Teva and Zara's voices rang out, calling for an end to the madness. But their pleas fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the drumbeat of war and the iron fists of totalitarian regimes. The conflict spiraled ever deeper into darkness. Whole systems became killing fields, choked with the detritus of shattered fleets and the corpses of the unburied. Famine stalked the stars, plagues mutated beyond control, and still the titans clashed. In the command center of a nameless outpost, Bailey stared at tactical displays awash in red. Supplies dwindled, reinforcements were non-existent, and the enemy pressed ever closer. She keyed her comm, voice steady despite the despair clawing at her heart. "All units, prepare for final defense. We hold until relieved or until we can't." The galaxy burned, and in the inferno, the seeds of annihilation took root. The galaxy burned, and in the inferno, the seeds of annihilation took form. Emperor Zoran's eyes gleamed with malevolent anticipation as he gazed upon the pulsing heart of the apocalypse array. The artificial singularity writhed within its containment field, a roiling mass of impossible darkness that seemed to devour light itself. "How soon?" he demanded, turning to the chief scientist. "The array will be operational within 72 hours, Your Majesty," the scientist replied, his voice quavering. "But the targeting systems are still unpredictable. We cannot guarantee—" Zoran's taloned hand closed around the scientist's throat. "You have 48 hours. Failure is not an option." As the Emperor strode from the chamber, alarms blared throughout the facility. On view screens, a swarm of human ships dropped out of hyperspace, weapons blazing. Aboard the UES Defiant, now christened the flagship of humanity's last desperate armada, Grand Admiral Simmons barked orders. All ships, concentrate fire on their outer defenses. We punch through at all costs. The void erupted in a maelstrom of plasma bolts and kinetic rounds. Everen's ships, their numbers depleted by the foundry raids, fought with the fury of cornered animals. On the bridge of the Shadow Dancer, Captain Reeves stared at the tactical display, his eyes unfocused. Nightmarish images from his torture sessions flickered at the edges of his consciousness. "Sir?" His XO's voice cut through the fog. "We're approaching the Array's command ship." Reeves nodded, forcing himself to focus. "Prep the boarding pods. We go in hot." As the battle raged around New Providence, Commander Bailey coordinated the planet's defenses. Orbital platforms unleashed salvos of missiles, while ground-based railguns spat hypersonic slugs into the sky. "Hold the line!" Bailey shouted into her comm as another wave of Everin dropships screamed towards the surface. "Every second we buy gives our fleet a chance." The Array's firing sequence initiated with a bone-deep hum that reverberated through space itself. A vortex of absolute darkness blossomed at the weapon's maw, hungrily consuming the closest planetoids. Reeves and his strike team fought their way through the Array's command ship, leaving a trail of Everin bodies in their wake. They reached the main control room just as the weapon reached full power. "Zhang, shut it down," Reeves ordered, his voice raw. The specialist's fingers flew across alien consoles. "Sir, I can't stop the firing sequence, but I can alter the targeting parameters." The singularity erupted from the Array in a torrent of unnatural energy. It tore through space, devouring everything in its path as it expanded exponentially. Chunks of New Providence's outer moons vanished into the void. Grand Admiral Simmons' voice crackled over the comms, tinged with desperation. "All ships, deploy antimatter warheads. It's our only chance." A salvo of experimental weapons streaked towards the singularity. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then reality itself seemed to tear asunder. The subspace rift bloomed like an otherworldly flower, its petals of fractured space-time engulfing the singularity. Shockwaves of unimaginable power radiated outward, shredding Everin and human ships alike. On the Array's command ship, Reeves stumbled as the deck bucked beneath him. Through the viewports, he watched New Providence's atmosphere ignite, continents cracking like eggshells. "We've won," he whispered, even as his fragmented mind began to slip away. But at what cost? In the aftermath, as the fires of apocalypse slowly guttered out, the galaxy held its breath. The war that had consumed worlds and shattered civilizations had reached its brutal climax. But in the ashes of devastation, the question remained: what would rise from the ruins of this cosmic conflagration? The subspace rift collapsed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Debris from shattered ships drifted aimlessly through the void, a grim testament to the devastation wrought by the Apocalypse Array. On the bridge of the UES Defiant, Grand Admiral Simmons surveyed the carnage with hollow eyes. "Status report," she croaked, her voice barely audible. "New Providence is, gone, sir," her XO replied, shock evident in his tone. "Massive tectonic destabilization. The planet's breaking apart." Simmons closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of grief before steeling herself for what came next. "Open a channel to all remaining ships. It's time to end this." As the remnants of humanity's fleet regrouped, President Graves and the Council convened in an emergency session. The mood was somber as they grappled with the weight of their Pyrrhic victory. "We must strike now while the Evora are reeling," Admiral Simmons urged, her hologram flickering in the center of the room. "I've analyzed data from the Array. We can reverse engineer the technology, create our own superweapons." "Absolutely not," Dr. Novak interjected, smacking his palm on the table. "We've seen the horror such weapons can unleash. Using them would make us no better than Zoran." The debate raged on, voices rising in anger and desperation. In the midst of the chaos, Commander Bailey received his new orders. He stared at the datapad, fists tight. "Invade the Evora homeworld," he muttered, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "End this war once and for all." Weeks later, Bailey stood in the cockpit of his assault mech, leading a column of hulking war machines through the shattered streets of the Everin capital. The sky was choked with smoke, buildings reduced to rubble by orbital bombardments. "Command, this is Spearhead Actual," Bailey reported, his voice tight. "We're approaching the Imperial Palace. Heavy resistance expected." As if on cue, plasma bolts erupted from fortified positions ahead. Bailey's mech shuddered as return fire blazed from its weapon mounts, the air filled with the screech of tearing metal and the screams of the dying. Inside the palace, Kalar paced before Emperor Zoran's empty throne. The room was filled with the last of the Everin elite, their eyes wild with fear and fanaticism. "They will never take us alive," Kalar roared, brandishing his ceremonial blade. "We fight to the last." The doors exploded inward in a shower of debris. Bailey's mech stomped through the opening, its massive frame dwarfing the cowering Everins. With a hiss of hydraulics, the cockpit opened, and Bailey emerged, plasma rifle at the ready. "Surrender now," he growled, "and this ends without further bloodshed." Kalar's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile twisting his features. "You speak of mercy, human? After all you've done?" He gestured to the nobles behind him. "Go on then. Show us the compassion of your species." Bailey's finger tightened on the trigger, indecision warring within him. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, with a roar of rage and anguish, he opened fire. Light years away, Ambassador Zara stood before the assembled Everin military hierarchy. Her hands shook as she activated a hollow projector, revealing schematics of weapons so horrific they defied description. "This is what Zorn was working on in secret," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Planet killers, genetic plagues. The array was just the beginning." The Everin generals murmured among themselves, faces pale with shock and disbelief. Zara pressed her advantage. "The war is over. You've lost, but it doesn't have to end in extinction. Surrender now, and we can forge a new path together." As the negotiations dragged on, reports trickled in from across the galaxy. Everin colonies in open rebellion. Human forces responding with overwhelming force. The cycle of violence seemed endless. On a war-torn world at the edge of former Everin space, Tiva addressed a crowd of human and Everin dissidents. Her words rang out, amplified by crude speakers. "We overthrew one tyrant only to become oppressors ourselves. This isn't peace, it's subjugation. We must stand together, or we'll all fall into darkness." The crowd roared its approval, but Tiva's victory was short-lived. A shadow passed overhead, a human warship, weapons primed and ready to fire. In the depths of a classified research facility, scientists pored over recovered Everin data. Their excitement grew as they deciphered the information, revealing the extent of Zorn's weapons programs. "This changes everything," one researcher breathed, staring at the display in awe and horror. "If we can harness this technology—" But as humanity grappled with the fruits of its victory, a creeping unease spread through the stars. The peace they'd fought so hard to achieve felt fragile, built on shifting sands of mistrust and resentment. In the rubble-strewn streets of New Geneva, a human child and an Everin orphan huddled together for warmth. Their eyes met, reflecting the same weary resignation. The war might be over, but its echoes would resonate for generations to come. The dust settled, but peace remained elusive. Humanity's victory over the Evora came at a devastating cost, leaving scars that ran deep across the galaxy. Admiral Lara Simmons stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Retribution, as it entered orbit around Kragos 4. The planet's surface was a patchwork of mining operations and fortified outposts, glowing like embers in the gathering dusk. "Status report," she barked, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Evora insurgent activity detected in Sectors 7 and 12, Admiral," her XO replied. "They've sabotaged 2 processing facilities and taken hostages at the main spaceport." Simmons's mind focused. "Deploy the shock troops. I want those rebels neutralized within the hour." As the dropship screamed towards the surface, carrying their lethal cargo, Simmons allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Evora would learn that resistance was futile. Across the stars on the beleaguered colony of Haven, Commander Bailey felt the weight of his new assignment pressing down on him. The spaceport bustled with activity as he disembarked, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. A young lieutenant approached, saluting crisply. "Welcome to Haven, sir. I'm afraid we have a situation developing in the Eastern District." Bailey nodded, unsurprised. "Brief me as we move. What's our status?" As they walked, the lieutenant's words painted a picture far more complex than Bailey had anticipated. Human colonial troops, drunk on power and resentment, were as much the problem as any Avora insurgents. In a dingy safe house on the outskirts of New Geneva, Tiva hunched over a battered communications console. Her fingers flew across the keys, encrypting a message to her scattered network of revolutionaries. "The attack on Earth was a success," she muttered, her voice tight with a mix of triumph and dread. "But the cost—" Zara placed a hand on Teva's shoulder, her alien features etched with concern. "We knew there would be casualties. It was necessary to—" An alert blared from the console, cutting her off. Teva's eyes widened as she scanned the incoming data. "No! They couldn't have—" On Earth, President Graves stood before the assembled council, his face ashen. The holographic displays surrounding them showed scenes of carnage from a dozen major cities. "The death toll is still rising," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Preliminary estimates suggest thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Admiral Chen smacked his head on the table. "This cannot stand. We must strike back, show these terrorists the true might of the Federation." Graves held up a hand, silencing the heated debate that threatened to erupt. "We cannot afford to act rashly. If we respond with excessive force, we risk destabilizing everything we've fought to build." As the argument raged on, Bailey found himself face to face with a ghost from his past. Kalar, the Avora rebel leader, stood before him in an abandoned warehouse on Haven's outskirts. "So, the Federation's attack dog returns," Kalar sneered, his hand resting on the hilt of a concealed weapon. Bailey raised his hands, palms out. "I'm not here to fight, Kalar. I'm here to propose a solution, one that could end this cycle of violence once and for all." Kalar's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with curiosity. "Speak quickly, human. My patience wears thin." As Bailey outlined his audacious plan, a democratically negotiated solution outside Federation control, he saw a flicker of something in Kalar's eyes. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps a willingness to listen. But then Kalar's expression hardened, a cruel smile twisting his features. "A pretty speech, Commander, but I'm afraid it's too late for diplomacy." With a gesture, Kalar activated a holographic display. Bailey's blood ran cold as he recognized the schematics of a weapon capable of rendering entire worlds uninhabitable. "The planet Devastator," Kalar hissed, his voice dripping with vengeance. "Buried in Haven's core, waiting to cleanse this world of your kind." Bailey's mind raced, calculating odds and weighing options. He knew he had to act fast to prevent catastrophe, but the stakes had just become unfathomably high. As alarms blared and violence erupted across Haven's surface, Bailey realized he was standing on the precipice of a new and terrible phase of the conflict. The war might be over, but the battle for the galaxy's soul was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.